All right, in this video, we're looking at one of the major compromises that was reached between northern states and southern states as they were working on the new U.S. Constitution. So there are also videos on the other two major compromises, the 3/5 Compromise and the so-called Great Compromise. We could call this one that we're going to look at today the Not-So-Great Compromise. So this is the Commerce and Slave Trade Compromise. Basically, there were, some issues coming up, and if you haven't watched those other two videos yet, just a general definition. A compromise is when two sides are trying to reach an agreement and they both need to give up something from their position to reach an agreement. So that is a compromise. It's usually no one walks away from the compromise super happy because neither side got exactly what they wanted. But in this case, this was, trying to reach these agreements to establish the new U.S. Constitution. And there were some debates about interstate commerce, meaning trade between the states, like shipping goods from one state to another. There was pretty fierce debate about the slave trade, about bringing new enslaved people into the country. Most northern states did not rely very much on slavery or the slave trade. Southern states that were more agricultural definitely did. And then there was an issue of taxation, like what could the government tax as far as things we were making here in the U.S. and then selling to other countries, or how much could they tax things coming into the country, that kind of thing. So let's look at what both sides wanted. So the northern states wanted the federal government, which is the national government, to have complete control over interstate commerce, to be able to regulate trade between the states, and to also have power over goods coming into the country and leaving the country. Southern states weren't thrilled about this, though, because they could kind of look ahead and see, okay, if the federal government gains this power, northern states gain influence, and they could use that power to then kind of outlaw slavery just by locking down slavery through interstate trade and not letting slaves move from one slave state to another or new slaves come into the country. They were afraid this would be a way to kind of backdoor get rid of slavery. So they did not want to give the federal government a ton of power. The compromise, was that the North got this control over most interstate trade. They would also be able to put taxes on goods coming into the country from other countries. But the Southern states won a few things. So they put in there that the government could not outlaw the slave trade until at least 1808. So basically they kicked the can 20 years down the road, saying that the federal government could not stop new slaves being brought into the country. And then they also, southern states, a lot of the cotton or tobacco or other agricultural goods that they grew in the South were then sold to other countries. A lot of cotton went to England because they were making cloth in England. And so they got something in the Constitution basically saying the national government cannot put taxes on goods that we're selling to other countries. So the South gained a lot this way. The North also gained in that a lot of people from the northern states wanted this new constitution to be put in place. And so they gave up a lot of things to get the southern states to come along, right? So what were some of the lasting effects of this compromise? It helped to gain southern support for the new U.S. Constitution. Overall, a good thing, right? This Constitution has lasted for over 200 years now. It set in place a lot of things to make our country stronger. But there were a lot of bad things baked into this compromise. Slavery was protected by the Constitution, basically. It was enshrined in the Constitution that slavery could not be touched, the slave trade, for at least 20 years. And during that time, the number of slaves in the country almost doubled, or grew by quite a bit. So we went from maybe like 700,000 slaves in the United States, and then 20 years later, we've got 1.2 million. And by the time we get to the Civil War, before slavery is outlawed, there were 4 million enslaved people in the United States. So kicking the can down the road on slavery, not addressing that question then, was definitely a cost. Congress did outlaw the international slave trade in 1808, like right away. They stopped allowing new slaves being brought into the country, although a lot of people still got around that in different ways. But it did not outlaw slavery itself. Obviously, that was not put to an end until after the Civil War was over. Compromise is never great. This one is definitely not one of the better compromises, but at the time, slavery was just kind of impossible to touch. Basically, even northern states did not outlaw slavery at the time of the start of our country. There just weren't a lot of enslaved people at the time. It was just an issue that could not be addressed and keep the existing states together. That is the Commerce and Slave Trade Compromise. Hopefully this has helped, and if you have any questions, please let us know.